Good morning, everyone. For those of you who are just joining us, uh, again, my apologies for the delay in getting our email to you with the embargoed news release and the start of our press briefing this morning. We had some unexpected email difficulties. I'm Karen Shinsky. I am a press officer here at DEP, and I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us to hear updates on the Resilient Environments and Landscapes rule. We will have updates from Commissioner LaTourette, followed by Watershed and Land Management Assistant Commissioner Jennifer Moriarty and State Floodplain Administrator Vincent Mazzei. Just a couple of quick housekeeping points for your awareness. We are recording the briefing this morning, so we would ask everybody to please remain on mute while our speakers are doing their presentations, and then when we get to the Q&A portion, we also do have quite a few media partners on the call, so when we do get to Q&A, more instructions to come at that time, but we will want to make sure that everybody gets at least a chance to ask one question, and at that point, we'll use the raise the hand function, and people will be called on in the order in which their questions come up. So again, thank you for your patience and for joining us this morning. And with that, I will turn it over to Commissioner LaTourette.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you again for your patience and for making the time to join us this morning to talk about our resilient environments and landscapes, or REAL rule proposal. As many here are aware, the Department of Environmental Protection proposed this rule in 2024 following 4 years of development through a robust stakeholder engagement process where we worked with many folks, cross-section of stakeholders from business, from industry, from our coastal communities, elected leaders, professionals and practitioners, and so on and so forth. And we proposed that rule last year in August of 2024. It took a significant amount of public comment, as you'll hear about today, and have been evaluating whether it is appropriate to make some changes to the proposal. And we have concluded that a notice of substantial change would be the best pathway forward in order to be responsive to the public comment and stakeholder feedback that we received. So I'm going to share a little bit more about that with you and then turn it over to my colleagues to go into some details and then provide ample time for questions. I can stay beyond 11. I know that we had a delay in starting. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Many of the folks organized here today have been attentive to this matter and this reform for several years. But if to the extent we have folks with us who are newer to the issue, in 2020, Governor Murphy announced through executive order the pursuit of reforms that would better integrate considerations of climate change into our environmental regulatory scheme. And from that, the DEP developed Resilient Environments and Landscapes, which is an effort to modernize our state-administered land resource protection rules with the goal of better assisting our communities, our businesses, our residents in building their resilience to the impacts of climate change that we cannot avoid, that are worsening, impacts from sea level rise, extreme weather, chronic flooding, and other considerations like storm surge and such. And we undertook this reform in multiple parts. Some of you may recall that in 2022, we proposed and then adopted in 2023 the Inland Flood Protection Rule, which is an update to the standards for our fluvial riverine communities. And a primary focus of REAL is the updating of flood area standards for our state's coastal zone. An incredibly important task. RIO effectively is finishing the job we started when the Inland Flood Protection Rule was proposed in the wake of Tropical Storm Ida and its devastating impacts on our state. And the need to finish the job in the coastal zone couldn't be more clear. 2/3 of our coastline are already at high risk or very high risk to erosion. 98% of our coastline at medium or very high risk to sea level rise, and nearly 500,000 acres of New Jersey land is highly vulnerable to an array of coastal hazards. And so that's the underlying principle of REAL, is to update those standards so that what we build today will stand the test of time amidst a changing climate. Right? And so what we proposed in August of 2024 was very much pointed at that direction. But the import of the engagement, the public comment process, the stakeholder feedback that we've received it could not be more important to us. It is critical that, as we work to advance the protection of our coastal and our inland communities, that we are meeting people where they are, that we're listening to the concerns and the need for clarity that come from our coastal communities, in particular, with respect to REAL. And so from that engagement, we've identified 5 primary areas for change to be responsive to that public comment and stakeholder feedback that are identified here on this slide. First and foremost, lowering the proposed coastal flood elevation, which also reduces the proposed coastal flood hazard area jurisdiction expansion that is within REAL itself. We're hearing from our coastal communities that they are comfortable with a higher level of risk, and we need to consider that in how we move forward. We need to address the concern or misimpression about the creation of no-build zones, which are not a thing and never have been with respect to this rule. We need to make sure that we are addressing the compelling public needs of our residents and our communities, especially with respect to inclusionary and affordable housing production. And we need to make sure that projects that are in development, those in the pipeline, if you will, are able to proceed as they were planned, utilizing existing rules. And so proposing an extension to the legacy period in this rule is a priority for us. And we've got to provide flexibility so that folks really understand what it means to provide dry access in a flood-prone area. And so I'm going to invite Assistant Commissioner Jennifer Moriarty to begin explaining these concepts. And we're going to go through briefly. We're going to provide you a copy of this information so that we can spend time on your questions and issues you'd like us to address for you. Because one of the things that is deeply important to me professionally and that we see so clearly the need for is accurate information being conveyed to the public that we all serve. So we appreciate all of you in the Fourth Estate joining us and hearing this information so that we can best inform the people of New Jersey. Assistant Commissioner, take it away.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, everyone. So first, I'll just go through some of the more procedural aspects of the Notice of Substantial Change. I'll take you back to August of last year, when we proposed REAL on August 5th. We then held 3 public hearings in September of 2024, opened up a 90-day comment period, and out of my program, my team has been looking at all of the comments that we received, preparing responses to those comments, and that was all part of the decision making that went into our decision to do a Notice of Substantial Change. We had comments from 2,965 commenters. So a Notice of Substantial Change is being utilized here because it is a mechanism under the Administrative Procedure Act that allows us to make changes to the original proposal that are more substantive in nature. And so it allows for additional public input. So there will be another public comment period and a public hearing before the initial proposal with changes is adopted by or around the end of the year. The next steps in a little bit more, with a little more specificity, we will be publishing the notice of substantial change in the New Jersey Register on Monday, July 21st. That will begin a 60-day public comment period. And we will hold a public hearing during that time as well on September 3rd. And then, as we said, the intent is to adopt the original proposal with the changes that you'll see in the notice of substantial change incorporated by January of next year. So first and foremost, the notice of substantial change proposes to update our sea level rise projections from 5 feet of sea level rise by 2100 to 4 feet of sea level rise by 2100. This is because of a mounting consensus in the scientific community about the amount of global warming that we'll be experiencing. So under that moderate emissions scenario, we now anticipate that sea levels will rise by 4.4 feet by 2100 instead of 5.1 feet. And that's because global temperature increase is now projected to be 2.7 degrees, whereas at the time of the original proposal, it was projected to be 3.3 degrees of warming. I've listed out some of the sources for that revised projection, and we will have those links up on our website once the proposal is out, so that folks can look at that for themselves. And so what this means is, practically speaking, that inundation risk zone, or IRZ, will now be based on 4 feet of sea level rise rather than the original proposed 5 feet. And just to refresh you, the inundation risk zone is that area of land that is currently above sea level, but by 2100 will be either permanently inundated or inundated twice a day by the tides because of sea level rise. So that area will now become a little bit smaller, and we will have mapping that will come out concurrent with the notice of substantial change, so folks can see what that looks like. And then the other practical implication of that is that the elevation to which you have to flood-proof or elevate new or substantially improved buildings will be decreased by 1 foot. And as part of this notice of substantial change, we are also codifying the commitment we've been making all along, and that is evidenced by this notice of substantial change itself, which is that the department is always looking at the science. We are always willing and able to adapt as needed as that science is changing. So we will be looking at it every 5 years and determining whether any changes, whether for better or worse, are happening to our projections for 2100, and can revise our rules accordingly. So we are proposing in the notice of substantial change to remove the inundation risk zone from the list of coastal special areas that the department will aim to designate as an area to be given a lower impervious cover requirement. Now, this is, as the commissioner mentioned at the top, to address some understandable misunderstandings of the public that these rules and this provision in particular creates a no-build zone. The rules have always required the department to review actions of the State Planning Commission to see if a boundary change made by the State Planning Commission complies with the purposes of CAFRA. And in doing that, we always look at our environmental resources, or special areas as they're called. The real proposal simply listed out those special areas, but because the inundation risk zone is a new special area, I think we think that really gave people pause and made people nervous that it meant the entire inundation risk zone is going to be subject to 3% impervious requirement, which is low. And so that of course, was never the intent. And we want to make sure that we are erasing that concern from people's minds. It isn't going to happen. It never was. And so we just want to take that inundation risk zone off the list. And we will continue to review State Planning Commission actions the way we always have, which could mean that if the State Planning Commission proposes an area that is in the inundation risk zone and has other environmental resources on it to be heavily developed, we might and we can, work with the State Planning Commission and the local government to tweak that boundary as is appropriate, but it by no means means that the entire inundation risk zone is subject to a 3% impervious. We've also heard loud and clear that folks are concerned about these rules potentially having an impact on affordable or inclusionary housing projects. And while it's extremely important to the department to make sure that that type of housing is sited appropriately and in a way that is safe for its residents, we also recognize that the state needs affordable housing. And so there is a way to strike a balance there, and that is what we are doing. So we're proposing, I'll take you back to the original proposal first, which added a category of projects that are eligible for what's called a hardship exception under the flood hazard rules, which is a provision that allows some level of relaxation of certain building standards where it is not practicable on a particular site if public safety is not unreasonably jeopardized. And so what we are proposing to do in the notice of substantial change is to take that new language, which says if the department determines there's a compelling public need for the project, that project will be eligible for hardship. And we are going to clarify that a compelling public need includes the need to provide affordable housing. And this is being done to make sure that there is certainty and predictability for our development community, that affordable housing projects will be eligible to apply for these hardship exceptions. They are a project type that we will be looking at closely to see where flexibility is appropriate. And of course, as always, there are public safety standards built into that hardship exception so that we can all decide, we can take a look, work with the developer, look at the plans and decide whether flexibility is appropriate here, because there are things that can be done that will still protect the public and the residents of that building. We are proposing to expand what are called the legacy provisions, or the provisions of the rule that allow certain projects to proceed under today's rules instead of the real amendments. So we're providing in the notice of substantial change a 180-day legacy period under our general and individual permit standards. So under the original proposal, the way it usually works is if an application is declared complete for review after the effective date of real, then the new standards would apply. Real would apply. Under the notice of substantial change, in recognition of some of the comments that we got where developers were saying, hey, we put in a lot of time and effort and resources well before we submit an application to the department. We've been, depending on the prior rules for all of that planning. So in recognition of that, we are proposing that applicants will have 180 days from the effective date of real to submit a complete application before the new standards would apply. So if we adopt the rules on January 5th, an applicant would have until July 4th to get us a complete application before the new rules would kick in if they're applying for an individual or general permit. And I will hand it over to Vince Mazzei, our state floodplain administrator, to detail some of our changes to dry access. And then I think we are just about done with the slides.
Yes, thank you, Jen. And thank you again, everyone, for spending time with us this morning to go through this. And as Jen mentioned, we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. So just two quick slides on this concept of dry access. So Most of what we've talked about so far today relates to tidal flooding or coastal flooding. This change relates to non-tidal flooding in the fluvial areas. And what dry access means is the ability for folks to be able to get out of their buildings or for emergency personnel to get into the building during a flood event. The conventional way of approaching floodplain management over the years has been to say, let's elevate or floodproof buildings. And if the assumption is that if the building is built correctly, then the folks inside would be safe. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. We have flood events that wash away houses, especially in flash flood areas. And the second thing is that even if you wanted to shelter in place and your building was safe, we've had, unfortunately, terrible situations where buildings have caught on fire or people have had medical emergencies and they weren't able to get out of the building to a hospital, which has resulted in fatalities and injury. So what the dry access requirement does is to say, if you're putting a lot of people in the floodplain, like in a multi-residence building, or if you're constructing what we call a critical building, like a police station or a hospital, that you have this access. So this standard has been in the rules almost for 20 years in one form or another, but it's gotten more complicated recently because as flooding increases, the flood depths on the roads increases. And so we received a lot of comments about the inability or the difficulties or challenges facing providing dry access. And we recognize that not every situation is the same, where you might have to drive through 6 inches of water, or you might have to drive through 5 feet of water. You might have to go 50 feet, you might have to go 500 feet to get out of the floodplain. And so what we're doing is incorporating all the different factors that would go into someone explaining to us, it's impracticable to elevate the existing roadways, but this is what we can do. And that will help reduce the number of applications that go into their hardship exception requirements that Jen mentioned. Jen, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So the backstop is that we still want to make sure that roads accessing these buildings are at least as elevated to the 100-year flood elevation. And so the flexibility in going to that elevation or going to something less than our design flood would be things like the depth and velocity, the amount of time the primary access would be underwater. How often is this going to happen? Every year, every 100 years? How fast do the floodwaters get there? We saw that during Ida, where folks were within minutes trapped in their house because the floods came so fast. And how many people are being impacted? So, putting this together, we believe that folks will be safer and we'll have a better understanding of the flood dynamics for each of the developments, and we'll also be providing flexibility to folks. And I think that's it.
That's
Thank
it. We
you,
have
Vince.
our, sorry, go ahead, Karen.
Sorry, Jen. If we are ready to move to Q&A, Commissioner, Jen, Vince, are we ready for that next step? Okay. So to our media partners, if you would please use the raise your hand function at the top of your screen, and we will call on you in order of your questions. We do have nearly 20 media partners on the call, so we would like to give everybody the opportunity to ask one question for now, and then we will circle back to address your follow-ups. As Commissioner stated at the top of the call, he will make himself available if we do run past 11. So with that, Michael Warren, please go ahead.
Thank you, Karen. I want to focus specifically on the compelling need hardship for affordable housing development. If you could give just a little bit more clarity on like how you envision DEP striking that balance, like what threshold a project would need to meet. And the first thing that comes to my mind is those apartments in Elizabeth during Ida that many of us spent a lot of time covering, and just curious how DEP expects to avoid more of those situations in the future.
Thanks for the question, Michael. I'll start to answer this and invite Jen and Vince to add anything they may think appropriate, or of course to correct me. So first and foremost, I think what we need to say very clearly is under no circumstances are we here at the DEP or the Murphy administration suggesting that folks who are in need of affordable housing should be placed in the most vulnerable areas. What we're doing in this change is clarifying an eligibility that exists already, but is not express, meaning within the definition or statement of compelling public need, affordable housing isn't specifically called out, but it is, of course, a compelling public need to house people, and especially to house the most neediest among us. Now, what that does not do is alter the standard for achieving a hardship exemption, meaning that if you are to pursue a hardship exemption as a developer, you must ensure that your modality for providing flood protection is just as protective as the underlying standards set by the DEP. There may be other means to go about providing that protection that a developer may wish to pursue, that DEP would have to evaluate to ensure it is just as protective. With respect to what you saw, though, in Elizabeth, where you have effectively a development and living space that is partially underground in a floodplain, right? That is somewhat subterranean. That's not allowed anymore under our flood rules and hasn't been in a long time. So we wouldn't expect to see those types of circumstances because you cannot have subterranean living space in any kind of a floodplain any longer.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Michael. John, before I get to you, I'd just like to ask our media colleagues, we want to make sure that everyone received the embargoed news release. And if you have not received it as of this time, please put your name in the chat and I will make sure to email it directly to you so you do have it. Again, apologies for the email difficulties that we were experiencing this morning. We just want to make sure everybody does have that release. So if you did not get it, put your name in the chat and I'll take care of it as quickly as possible. John Hurdle, please go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much for having this briefing. I suspect that the environmental community is going to see this as a capitulation to the business lobby and the pressure that they put on the DEP over this rule. Can you respond to that, please?
Our job at the DEP with respect to our responsibilities under the Flood Hazard Area Control Act is singular. That job is to protect life, safety, and property, irrespective of the lobbying that may come from any particular constituency. And we've got to be guided by the best available science and acknowledge that science is not static. It does, in fact, change. What you heard from Assistant Commissioner Moriarty was an articulation of how the policy case informs the sea level rise projections. And by that, I mean, one of the components of the sea level rise calculation are the policies and commitments in place across the globe to address climate change. Those policies and commitments are different today than they were in 2019. We have to acknowledge that. But we also have to acknowledge there's risk in that. By that, I mean, the policy case is a reference to significant progress in the last several years. And we now see a slowdown in that progress. And by putting in this rule, codifying the commitment of updating these projections every 5 years, you may see an up or down movement in either direction. But there's something that also must be clear, is that anyone developing property is free to pursue added protections if they wish. We are setting a baseline here. And those who may wish to improve upon that baseline are free to do so.
Thank you. Karen, can I ask one follow-up question, please?
John, I'd really appreciate it if we could just give everybody a chance to
Yeah,
please
put your
get
hand back
through.
up so you get a new number, John.
Yep.
Excuse me?
Go ahead and raise your hand so you're in order. We have a
all
couple
right.
of people who've been waiting patiently. Thank you so
All
much,
right.
John.
Understood.
Steve, please go ahead.
Thanks, Karen. Thank you to everyone. It's more of a figures sort of question, but last year, the DEP talked about how about 16% of the state lied within a floodplain, a FEMA floodplain, I should say, and the real rule proposal would increase that floodplain regulated by the state to roughly 17.5% of the land area. So I wondered if, given the new iteration of real, can you provide like updated figures on what that would look like?
Sure. So appreciate that question and your attention to that detail, Stephen. So the projection of the 1.5% of the land area is informed by the coastal flood elevation that is identified. That coastal flood elevation is not just about how high you build, because, well, that depends on the topography of the property in question. But it does also inform the extent of the jurisdiction, how far that flood line proceeds inland. Right, if we're talking crudely. So the 17.5 would go down to about 17%. And so instead of it being 1.5% addition, it's about a 1% addition. That's a bit inexact. New mapping of that will be available next week when the notice of substantial changes is published. So you'll be able to see updates on the REAL website, dep.nj.gov/NJREAL. And on that site, you can access the flood indicator tool. Next week, the flood indicator tool will be updated. The team's working real hard to get that done this week.
Rye, go ahead.
Thank you. Commissioner, you talked about how coastal communities are comfortable with a higher level of risk. Can you talk a little bit more about what communities those were, sort of were those mayors? And then in those conversations, did your team say, we have cost benefit projections. If we're wrong about 4 and it's really 5, this many more people will die, this much more property will be damaged. Can you sort of quantify that too? Thank you.
I appreciate that question, Rye. So I think one of the things that's important to acknowledge here is that post Sandy, in coastal communities, folks will look at Sandy as a benchmark, much like in inland communities, folks look at Ida as a benchmark storm. So there's a lot of feedback that we hear from coastal communities about, well, now that we're X many years past Sandy and there's been new improvements to dunes or to flood control infrastructure, should we be as concerned? That's one line of conversation. The other point to recognize is that in many communities independently decide to go higher than the baseline elevation that even we set. And there's about 30 or so, 35 maybe, communities in New Jersey that do that already go above where the DEP is. And it's important to us to recognize and respond to that local preference in either direction. We're not compromising public safety by going to 4 feet, given the projections that were shared, understanding that those do and will change. But when I say communities are more comfortable with a higher level of risk, it does come out of direct conversations with mayors, many of whom have written into us or who have passed resolutions in their communities that indicate their belief that 5 feet is too much. And it's important to take that in, not to compromise our standards, not to look past the science, but to consider that local preference and folks' view of their communities. It's important.
Brenda?
Hi, good morning, and thank you for taking my question. I just wonder how you, to follow up on John's comment, are going to explain this and try and get some acceptance from environmental groups who have so solidly campaigned on behalf of these rules, have argued how they make so much climate sense, both in terms of protecting the shoreline, the communities, and life, people's lives. They've committed to their own campaigns for this, but also they've solidly backed the DEP, and now it looks like you're backing down. What do you say to them?
So I first and foremost want to recognize that the feedback that we receive from a cross section of stakeholders is equally important to us. Just as we need to respond and be cognizant of and appreciate the perspectives of local community leaders, so too do we need to integrate the perspectives of developers and advocacy organizations, whether those are advocacy organizations for the environment, for local governments, or for business and industry. Everybody's voice is important. But at the end of the day, again, our job is singular. It is to ensure the protection of life and property. And we're doing that in this new, some might say revolutionary, I think it's just common sense way of looking forward, right? And not just looking backward, right? And so the perspective that some carry would be, we should plan out well beyond 2100, right? That's only 75 years away. I live in a 100-year-old house, as you know, perhaps some of you do as well. And then there are voices that say, no, we should plan for only to the next 35 years because we're kind of knocking things down and rebuilding them every 30 years. I'm not so sure that's entirely true, but having all of those voices, having all of those perspectives inform what we're doing is critical. I appreciate our friends in the ENGO community and their perspectives and their support. But at the end of the day, we've got to ensure we're being responsive to all. And what we're doing here is making the primary change, that 5 to 4 feet, in view of the scientific consensus and the policy case that exists. Now, what you may hear is, well, there's backsliding occurring, and shouldn't we just stick with 5? And that's a valid perspective. But to that, I would say, we've got to start somewhere. Here is where we start. And in 5 years, we're going to revisit this and revisit it again and revisit it again, because we shouldn't pretend that it is static. Pretending that flood areas and flood experience is static is part of why we see the level of disaster after disaster that we see.
Sophia.
Well, I guess one question, and then I just want to push a little bit more on Rye's question about the increased risk. So in the reduction of the extent of the coastal flood hazard area, do you guys have a number of buildings that are being removed from that proposed area with this change? And have you done any modeling about, you know, over a given period of time, statistically, how many more buildings would flood with the reduced height and also extent?
It doesn't exactly work the way that your question presumes, meaning the flood dynamics themselves do not work the way that the question presumes, because it's not as though throughout the coastal zone, every parcel is the same elevation and has the same level of flood risk as a baseline matter. Topography is very related to the parcel by parcel experience of flooding. And so we wouldn't be able to predict what number of buildings, right, that are in or not in. You've got to look at it based on the flood indicator tool, again, which will be updated next week. And you'll be able to zoom in specifically on a parcel level and see the existing condition and the projected flood boundary. And then from there, you can then consider what is the existing elevation of the property and what the building elevation might need to be or is today. It's a bit more complex than that, I guess is what I'm saying. Trying to see if that's responsive to your question. I don't want to leave you without an answer.
Yeah, I guess just to clarify, so you mentioned like roughly 17 versus 17.5%. So that extent change, how many fewer buildings would be covered under the rules based on that shrinking of the zone?
So you'll be able to see that in the flood indicator tool. In some instances, depending on topography, it could be a lot size more. It could be a block more or less. It's not linear. Is what I'm trying to convey. But Vince, perhaps you could do a better job than I in conveying that.
Thank you. So yeah, you know what it really comes down to, Sophia, I think, is that you know, we're sticking with the same level of flood risk. It's just that the data that we have that says what the projections in the future are going to be has shifted a bit, and so we're trying to be responsive to those folks that say, hey, we need to be basing this on the best available science, which has always been our goal. So the number of homes or buildings is difficult for us to estimate, just like the commissioner said, because of all the variety of things like topography and road networks, and you know, even going down to that granular level of topography on a particular house, to say a house is right on the edges in or out is very hard to do with certainty. But it will, by reducing the added area slightly to reflect the current science, it's going to be a marginal decrease. And the folks on the outside of that, we don't believe are at flood risk based on the standards that we've put forth. And one thing I always like to point out to people too is that everybody that's in the floodplain, the expanded floodplain, the existing floodplain, not only has to abide by the new flood elevation, but the floors of buildings have to be 1 foot above that. So if FEMA says the flood is here and we're saying the flood is actually 4 feet higher, then people actually have to build their lowest floor 1 foot above that. And so really you do have 5 feet of protection, and you know, because there's this, obviously the science has a bandwidth of, you know, of certainty.
Thank you. Frank?
Yeah, so can you elaborate a bit on how you settled on the change to 4 feet by 2100? Is this something you've taken from the IPCC or Rutgers experts? In your own original rule proposal, I think it cites a moderate emission scenario of, say, 3.3 to 5.1 feet. So picking 4 feet sounds kind of as if you just got, you know, maybe a compromise here. So I guess what I'm asking is, where are you getting the 4 feet from, or what scientific source? 1 foot is a pretty big difference.
Sure. So I'll begin an answer to that for you, Frank. Appreciate the question, and then invite Jen and Vince to chime in as well. So what is important to understand about the formulation of the projected sea level rise, and then by extension the elevation, is that it is informed by the policy case that exists at a particular point in time. And that policy case changes. So in 2019, when the Science Technical Advisory Panel put out its report, that policy case suggested that we were headed for a higher degree of warming. The policy case now suggests that we're headed for a lower degree of warming, the difference between 3.3 degrees and 2.7 degrees. That change affects the level of sea level rise. And it affects it in a bandwidth. It's not as though the 2.7 degrees is the number that absolutely will occur based on global policy today, but actually occurs in a bandwidth where 2.7 is the central number. And so on the high end, it's 3.4, which is very close to the 3.5 from STAP. And this shifts over time as we see countries around the world make commitments, adopt laws, and institute changes to reduce emissions from the level that they exist today. And it presumes that those commitments will be fulfilled. That's important, right? Because that may change. We're seeing that change in this country right now. And so that's why it's important to consistently update the science, right? Nothing about the way the number is formulated has changed. The inputs have changed as a function of global initiative since 2019. So that is why we see the lower number. It's not a capitulation or a compromise. It is being directly responsive. And when I say folks are comfortable with more risk, there are some who would say to you, and I imagine we will hear something along these lines from the ENGO community, which is, well, we're at this time, because the policy case does not stand still, at this time, we're now seeing some backsliding. So perhaps it would be safer, and not just in the United States, but elsewhere. So perhaps it would be safer to stay with the 5 feet. But what we are proposing is consistent with the way we have proposed the original rule, recognizing that it doesn't stand still. So let's not pretend it does. Let's become more dynamic, right? Let's change with the science, with the projections, and not pretend that it's static.
If I could just clarify, where does the policy case come from? I guess that's what I don't understand.
Sure.
Do you make the policy case, or does somebody else?
So Assistant Commissioner Moriarty mentioned this in her slides, that this will be published. The information is already available, but will be added to our website next week with the notice of substantial change. But there's an organization that evaluates this, the Climate Action Tracker, which identifies the policy case, and that informs the work of STAP and the IPCC as well. So you'll see all of those references in that in the documents that are available next week. And you can see that shifting change. You can go to the Climate Action Tracker or CAT website, and you can see some of that right available for yourself now.
Thank you for clarifying.
John, go ahead.
Yes. So is there any part of the existing rule that you will be adopting now, or will you, or is the entire rule now subject to this process that you've described? And if that is the case, is there a risk that the adoption of the real rule will not happen during the Murphy administration? And I'm thinking about the January deadline that Jennifer talked about.
I don't think that risk exists. And so I'll start with the end of your question, John. So the procedure that Assistant Commissioner Moriarty laid out is that when we take the step of making a substantial change, we have to notice that. We have to engage in an additional comment period of 60 days. That notice will occur July 21st. Then that comment period will extend for 60 days, and we'll have to respond to additional comments. The rule is still in its proposal phase during that time, and it gets adopted all together. And so it is not as though there's a part of the rule that becomes effective today and a part that becomes effective when this notice of substantial change process is complete. It all happens at the end, which just by function of the calendar, the real one, not the political one, just by function of the calendar, that puts us toward the end of the year.
Okay, thank you.
Amanda?
Hi, thank you for taking my question. Is there anything in these rules or maybe elsewhere in the DEP efforts right now that would help these communities that are already on the coast going through serious repetitive flooding? I'm talking Asbury Park during heavy rains, the Northern Barrier Island, Bayside communities, Long Beach Island. I know these are all built out communities, but is there anything happening that can help these places?
Absolutely, and all the time. And so I'll give you just a few examples and invite the Assistant Commissioner to expound on them. So under Assistant Commissioner Moriarty, we have our Flood Hazard Area Control Act regulatory program, which is what we're talking about today, which is very forward-looking. But we also have the Division of Resilience Engineering and Construction. And the Division of DREC, as we call it, works on coastal protection and inland fluvial protection projects all throughout the state. The DEP partners with the Army Corps to replenish our beaches and our dunes on a very cyclical basis, for example. We work with our federal partners on constructing flood control infrastructure, both at the shore and inland in our riverine communities. There's no one single solution, however, to the problem a community faces from flooding. And by that, I mean, you need to recognize that to build your resilience, the menu is large, and you've got to look at your future-focused regulatory approach to build things up and maybe back some things up from the water's edge, at the same time that you're investing in both nature-based and civil engineered infrastructure to reduce flooding. At the same time, you're considering whether there are some properties that are so repeatedly harmed that perhaps that landowner might want to make use of the New Jersey DEP Blue Acres program, where we buy people out of flood properties, or pursue upgrades of other kinds, like water infrastructure to carry higher amounts of flood waters. There's the way that I think about it is that the resilience menu is large, but you have to invest in each course for it to be effective. But we also have to recognize something important, which is those projects are incredibly expensive. We just finished the renourishment in Northern Ocean County. That was $55 million, right, for beach and dune replenishment. And that's a federal and state shared cost. And we see right now how the big mega projects like the New Jersey Back Bays project, that was going to be a system of levees and tide gates from Manasquan down to Cape May at a cost of $16+ billion, being too vast for the federal government to move forward with in whole. So they're only moving forward with it in part, doing elevations without any flood barriers at all. And so we've got to consider all of those different things and plan now by using our Resilient New Jersey planning program. There's a whole suite of things we can do. Jen, anything you'd like to add?
I think you covered all the highlights, Commissioner. I would just, add on the planning side of things as well under the Watershed and Land Management Program. And this is not necessarily due to storm surge or inundation, but stormwater planning and our municipal separate storm sewer system permitting program and the work that we're doing with municipalities there to map out their stormwater infrastructure, identify vulnerabilities, and find ways to remedy those things, which is also a huge help to municipalities and very much needed.
Nikita.
Hi, I just wanted to see if you could kind of play out how a hardship waiver exemption might work in the case of a dry access road. So would the elevation requirement in some cases be reduced? How far? So on.
Turn that over to Vince to give you an example, perhaps rooted without naming any particular project in a scenario we've experienced previously.
Sure. So the hardship exception process does two things. It recognizes that strict compliance of the rules can sometimes lead to unique hardships for folks, and it can take a variety of forms. But there are backstops built into the hardship exception process. So if we find that there's reason to provide some relief for whatever activity someone is requesting, they still have to make a demonstration that public health, safety, and welfare is not impacted, that there's that use of other properties is not impaired, that people are not put at additional risk. So it is generally would be difficult to provide all of that for a road that's going to be heavily flooded where people are going to be trapped. So the hardship exceptions that we've generally issued are the things that we're specifically putting in the rule, which is generally what we've done over the years, right? We develop a standard, we apply the standard, we find in using the rule where people are facing challenges, and so we amend the rules to be able to address that. So things like the depth and velocity of flooding, or how much time the road will be underwater, how many people are going to be there, how often is this going to happen, all the things that we've listed in this. Those are all considerations, but at the end of the day, our mandate is to protect the public, and so we would do that even if someone were requesting a hardship exception.
Sure.
Thanks,
So
Kanti. I'm sorry, go ahead, Nikita.
sure. So I'm just trying to still get an idea. So using these, so say a roadway for 100-yard portion floods, the floods typically take 30 minutes to recede. How does that fall within the scope of these regs?
Sure. So you're exactly right that no two situations are exactly the same, right? So you might have a situation where there's a small number of people that are being impacted, and it's only a few inches of water, and it's pretty easy to get through that to the other side. It's not very far. So that would be something that would be more more easy to deal with in this process than if you were had several feet of water. If people are effectively trapped there and they can't get out, and there's no way for them to be reached, then the rule doesn't really provide for us, and we wouldn't want to put people in that situation. So this is a recognition of, for example, along the Passaic River, it might take a day or two for the floods to hit certain areas. So depending on what kind of emergency plans and how much a warning time people have, that would be a significant factor. In areas that's subject to flash flooding, then there's not as much flexibility that we can provide. It's all about how fast the water gets there, how quickly the community can respond, and so on.
Got it. Thank you.
Vince? Kanti, not Mazai.
I was like, I have a question.
Vincent Kanti?
Mr. Conti, maybe your mute is on. If you're trying to speak, we can't hear you.
Am I off now? You can hear me now?
We can hear you
Yes,
now.
go ahead,
Yeah.
Vincent, go ahead.
Okay. One of the things that's bound to come up, you say in your talk today that two things motivated these changes. One, shifts in the best science, and two, responsiveness to the comments and concerns from the public that you've heard, public and officials. But you heard those over the course of the whole year, and the best science didn't change yesterday. So the question is, why are the changes you're proposing coming with only 3 weeks left before the sort of deadline for adopting the rule, and give you the chance to extend that deadline? What can you comment on the timing of this?
We're busy doing a lot of different things, including some of the coastal resilience projects and investments that Assistant Commissioner Moriarty and I just referenced. when you're pursuing a notice of substantial change, this is effectively the time that it would happen. It's not as though there's a delay baked in here somehow. There's a lot of consideration that goes into these things, a lot of deliberation, a lot of engagement with stakeholders, and this is the timeline that we're on. It's not reflective of anything other than us doing our work and having a lot of it to do.
Thank you.
Steve?
Commissioner, you previously talked about this if it's adopted. My phrase sort of more like a starting point, I suppose, for what could come up in the future in terms of policy just like this. And I wonder, 5 years after this is adopted, if it is adopted, do you believe that the elevation requirement could be increased further in the future? Above the 4 feet, I should say.
It's a good question, Stephen. First, I think this rule will be adopted. This administration has been committed to seeing this through and remains so. Second, it is inevitable that elevations will get higher along the coast beyond what we are doing now. We're only looking out here to 2100. Were you to look beyond that at a later time interval, you will see that sea level rise does in fact continue to increase. The rate of that increase is perhaps not as clear or linear as we might like, but the fact that that increase will continue for some time, particularly with unabated emissions, is an expectation we should all have. It's also an expectation that can be a little bit hard to wrap your head around. Right? It's hard to think about our communities looking and feeling different than they do today. But the coastal dynamics along our coast have always changed. Right? That change is becoming more dramatic, more severe as the climate crisis continues. But just earlier this morning, the State Floodplain Administrator Mazzei pointed out to me that since 1913, we've seen 18 inches of sea level rise increase on our coast. And so that is a reflection that I think is important. And what we say here isn't set in stone. Right? Policy is responsive to the circumstances on the ground, all of which change.
And John?
When was the last time DEP published a notice of substantial change? I mean, how unusual is this?
I cannot recall. It is pretty unusual. The assistant commissioner probably has a better answer than that.
I believe the last one was about 10 years ago, the last notice of substantial change.
Okay, thank you.
From DEP. Other agencies may have done them, but DEP.
No, I understand now.
Yeah.
The question just pertained to DEP. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
And there's a reason for that, John. A multifold reason in that we front load so much of the engagement and the study before a rule is ever proposed. Right? We began the outreach and engagement on REAL in February of 2020, just before the pandemic broke out, right? And we continued it through the pandemic and after. And we do that so as to have that robust input. And it often puts us in a position where we aren't making substantial changes upon adoption.
Thank you.
Sophia?
Another follow-up question about the affordable housing hardship exemption. Could you just give like a concrete example of a different strategy? Like, if they're not going to elevate a new project up to the 4 feet, what is a different strategy that a project could use to reduce risk that would be acceptable as one of those hardship exemptions?
So Vince, I think we have some some historic examples that we can kind of draw from on hardship that, again, without naming anything in particular, if you wanted to offer.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, no, that's a great question, Sophia. And as I mentioned, the balance with hardship exceptions is making sure that the public is not at risk, even if we do provide some relief. So let's say that you're along the coast today. The standard is that you'd have to have the floor of the building 1 foot above FEMA's flood elevation today. And so this raises that 4 feet. So there would be no circumstance where we would be able to allow someone to go below FEMA's elevation, because now you're facing FEMA's regulations and the federal minimums kick in. So the relief really is between our future projected elevations and what FEMA has set. And I have seen a few cases where we've allowed folks to have no freeboard and to make sure that the floor elevation is right at the flood elevation. I've seen it like in single family homes where it's very difficult, or duplexes where it's difficult if somebody's improving something and you can't elevate half of a duplex. I've seen some relief in those areas. But I've done this for 37 years, and I'm not aware of a case where the floor of the building has been substantially below what our regulatory flood is, because especially for residential structures. So I can see relief on the freeboard being given. I can see some relief given to the 4 feet, but not anything close to below what FEMA would require.
Okay, so if
sorry, go
they're,
ahead.
oh, I'm sorry, just to clarify, so if a project is going to get a hardship exemption, they could get relief from the 4 feet, but they're not going below BFE. But is there some other strategy that they would have to use to reduce that risk up to the same level as the 4 feet? I might be confused on that, but I was just wondering if you could give like a concrete example of what that could look like.
Yeah, sure. I can understand that. So, there are a lot of factors when someone is proposing to put folks in the floodplain. Where are people going to park their cars? The dry access issue is a relevant issue. So, let's say that there's a residential community and the buildings themselves are elevated. There's really no opportunity to flood-proof residential buildings. Really, the only option is to elevate in most cases. So, I can see situations with building access. I can see situations where like the lobby of the building might not be able to be elevated for a variety of reasons, or because of utilities, things like that. But the actual living space of the building is generally going to have to be elevated. I don't know if that fully answered your question.
Sure, yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Sophia. Steve, before I get to you, I see that Vincent Conti has a number 1. I just want to make sure he didn't have a follow-up ahead of you, or if Vincent, was your question already answered?
Yeah, mine was answered. I don't know why the number 1 didn't go away.
Okay, thank you. Steve, go ahead.
Thanks, Karen. My last question. I know there's the virtual public hearing, I should say, on September 3rd. But I wonder, have business groups and like others that have been critical of REAL in its previous iteration, have they been briefed on these specifics that we're going over today, on the new way that REAL is being outlined? And if so, what has been the response, or is an upcoming meeting going to do that?
We'll be, we'll be talking with a number of stakeholders today and throughout the week, including local municipal leaders, including trade organizations and other stakeholders, as well as nonprofit organizations. We have not yet. We're speaking to you.
And Sophia, your hand is also raised. Did you have another follow-up?
I did. Yeah. Thanks so much for answering all my questions. Just to clarify, to make sure I'm understanding correctly, with the inundation risk zone change, that is not a substantive change at all, right? This is just, it's the same exact process as was originally proposed. in this new change, but it is just removing that term from the list sort of for just so that people are not confused about any no build zone, right? There's no like actual process change being proposed compared to the originally proposed rule.
I'm not sure what you mean by process change, but I think the answer to your question is you're correct.
Okay, thanks. There's no substantive change to the way that a proposed project would go through this process.
In the end,
No.
right.
That's
Right. The standards for construction within the inundation risk zone are unchanged. What is changed is the location of the inundation risk zone, because the inundation risk zone is based on sea level +5 in the first proposal, and now it's going to be based on sea level +4. So the inundation risk zone itself will slightly decrease in area, but the standards within it are the same as they've been proposed.
Hillary.
Hi, I'm just curious about the pushback from stakeholders to lower elevation benchmarks. Is it so much more expensive to build to elevate at a higher level? Like, is it? I just, what's the cost difference between elevating 4 feet and 5 feet?
If I may.
Yeah, great.
Thank you. Sure. So our experience has been that building higher saves money in the long run in a variety of ways, right?
Right.
So there is a minor upfront cost to building higher. I'll use an example from Superstorm Sandy, where we increased the flood elevations along the coast to reflect some advisory mapping that FEMA had released on our behalf. That when folks elevated or built the lowest floor of their house 3 feet higher than required by FEMA, that there was about a 2 or 3% increase in the cost of the building, but that within 4 to 6 years, in every case that we looked at, all that extra money that was put up front is recouped in flood insurance savings, because if you're higher, you're going to pay less flood insurance. And so for the lifetime of the mortgage of that building, it was tens of thousands of dollars of savings. So I think that there's a misperception among some folks about, the cost of going higher and the inability to go higher and what that will do for the coastal communities. Everything that we're doing here is to protect the long-term economic viability of the coast and the folks that live there and their safety.
But am I right that was the main reason why they were pushing back, cost and effort involved? And
I think it was cost. It was
upfront costs, right?
Yeah, upfront costs, right? Because developer is going to be paying those upfront costs, and they'd have to pass that on to the end users. So I think that there was a concern that added upfront costs would be significant. We don't have any data that suggests that it would be. So, like I said, I think there's a lot of misperceptions. We've had folks say that this rulemaking would ruin the coastline, and but nobody can give us a concrete example of a situation where, elevating higher than required by FEMA would somehow ruin a project or make it unbuildable.
Right.
Yeah, just to go back to the question we've been asking a couple of times about these estimates. Rutgers' 2019 study said that 180,000 properties were encompassed by the 3.5% sea level rise, and 580,000 properties would be in risked by a 7.5% sea level rise. Can you narrow that down to what the difference is between 5 and 4? I think that's just it could be hundreds of thousands, but I don't want to assume.
We can do that, not on this particular call. As I mentioned before, we're updating the mapping right now. And so that'll be ready next week, but we can come back to you on that.
Hillary, did you have another question?
No.
Okay, thank you. Your hand was still raised. At this point, I think we have gotten through everybody's questions. So I'll turn it back to our speakers, Commissioner, Assistant Commissioner, and our floodplain administrator. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Only, again, a thanks for your patience as we've navigated this email disruption. You should have the materials now. To the extent you have additional questions, we're available to you. Again, we thank you for joining us, for working to make sure the public is well informed, and we appreciate your questions. And Jen, anything else?
Well said. Thank you for everyone's
Nothing else
time.
from me. Thank you all.
Take care, everyone.
And please reach out if you have additional questions that have not been answered. Thank you for joining us today.
Don't forget to end the recording, Karen.